Hello again. In this video I wanted to do a bit more of a chat about the cues and a few other things that I missed out in the other video which are quite important, and I do apologise for missing them out because, like I said before, I'm not really an expert when it comes to cues and my knowledge of them is really honestly very limited. So when I did the video, there were a few things that I did miss out and somebody pointed that out to me, so I felt as though I should cover them in this video. Now, one of those things was with regards to the actual shaft of the cue, because they all vary in stiffness. Because, for example, my cue is quite rigid. There's not a lot of play in it, and the way you test this is, if you hold the cue about 18 inches down and just grab the tip with your thumb and your index finger and just squeeze it over slightly, holding onto the bottom part of the cue there, you'll feel the tension on the cue. And mine is quite rigid. And that does have an effect when you're playing certain shots, you see, because when you impart side spin on the cue ball, because the cue is so solid with hardly any movement in it, what would happen is you would get a lot of deflection on the cue ball. What I mean by that is, as soon as you impart side on the ball, it would push the ball over. Now, if you've got a cue that's got quite a lot of flex in it, so a lot weaker in terms of the shaft stiffness, a lot weaker, that's not a bad thing, by the way. It's just that they have varying degrees of flexibility, the cues do. So what would happen then, you see, is if it's got a lot more flex in the cue, then when you play side spin on certain shots, there'll be less deflection of the cue ball because the impact has been absorbed by the cue itself, by the flex of the cue. So it kind of reduces that effect of the throw of the cue ball. And those are the differences with shafts, with the firmness of the shaft or the flexibility of the shaft. Now that will vary between cue to cue, and that is quite an important aspect, to be honest. It's not something I've paid particular attention to because, like I said, most of the cues I've had have been relatively cheap cues, and I suppose the common trait with them all has been that the shafts have been quite firm, not much flexibility to them. So over time I've just gotten used to that attribute of the cue. But there are cues out there which have got a hell of a lot of flexibility. The cue would actually go like this. Now, if I was looking for a cue, I would avoid one of those types of cues because you stand a lot of chance of ruining the table with one of those, because as soon as that cue hits the cue ball, then the weight of the cue ball would force the tip down into the cloth and it would damage the cloth. But those are in extreme cases. I haven't seen a lot of cues with that much flex, but there are different types of flexibility to the cue shaft, and that is something that you might want to consider when you're looking for a cue. It's possibly the reason why I didn't mention it in the previous video, because I've always gone for the cheaper cue, which they tend to have a much more rigid shaft to them. So I kind of disregarded that fact when I really should have mentioned it. So that's why I wanted to do this video, to make sure that everybody's aware of all the different aspects of cues and just what kind of things there are. The other thing I didn't mention before was the actual balance point of the cue. Now, I think I have measured my cue before, and I believe it was 17.5 inches balance point. And what that means is the weight distribution inside the cue here, because the cues are weighted at the bottom end, at the bottom part here, they're weighted. And what that means is the weight distribution has a balance point, and it's going to be somewhere around that area, you see, and it's about 17.5 inches, the balance point. And for me, what that means is that the cue isn't too light at the front, and it isn't too heavy going forward. It's kind of in the middle, which is a really nice weight to the cue for me personally. This is the kind of weight I like. I don't like it too bottom heavy, and I don't like it too far to the front, because I don't get a good enough feel to the cue. I always prefer it to be somewhere in the middle, not too far forward and not too far back, because when the weight's too far back and it seems as though there's virtually no weight to the front end of the cue, and it's really difficult to feel the shots, I find. So I like the weight to be further, just slightly further forward than it would be to be too far forward, just slightly back a bit, but not all the way back. And that's the other part of when you're looking for cues, what you should consider when you're trying one, when you pick one up. Because you should always pick one up. When you buy a cue, you should always pick one up, have a feel for it. Like I said before, check the length of the cue and have a feel of it, see where the weight is, see how it feels on the shot when you get down to play your shot, see how the cue feels, and if the weight distribution is fine enough for you. But that's something that you will learn over time, because as your game develops, you'll start to understand more about what your needs are and what your requirements are. And I think that's what would help you when you're looking for cues in the future. It's all these little parts that you need to understand in order to have a preferred type of cue. So those are the two things that I missed out before, which are important, I suppose. I suppose it depends how much you delve into them, because you can go too far with it. And I mean, like I say, I tend to steer away from the expensive cues because, like I say, I don't think they offer much more benefit than what a cheap cue does anyway, for me personally. So that's why I've not really ventured in that direction. So, yeah. So, and the other thing as well is, when I'm playing with the cues that I use, I'm a bit more specific about the length of the cue. Like I said, this is to my shoulder, and it's about 56.5 inches or 56 inches, something like I can't quite remember, but it's about 56.5 inches, I think. And the reason why I'm a bit more particular about the length is because when I'm playing, I always like to hold the cue right at the back. And I mean, there are other players that prefer to hold it further down. So the length of the cue isn't that critical for them, because they can adjust afterwards, you see. Because when you're playing, you need a bridge length of about 10 to 12 inches, something like that, something like this distance here. You need a bridge length, and that would dictate how far you hold the cue. So for me, I hold it right at the back, and that gives me the perfect cue length at the front. But like I said before, when you've got your cue, if you aren't too bothered about whether you need to be holding it at the very end or not, that would determine whether or not you need to be critical about the length of the cue, because like I said, you can just readjust when you find the happy cue length at the front, because that's the important part, how much cue is in front. Because you can't have a small gap there, bridging gap, because then you can't generate the power, because the cue can't go back far enough, you see. And equally, you can't have too much of a bridge length, because then you lose the control and you lose the accuracy, because it's possible to have unnecessary movement here. So we're kind of trying to find the sweet spot, not too short, not too long, somewhere in the middle, so that you find the sweet spot. And then, like I said, that dictates how far up you hold the cue, or how near to the end you hold the cue, provided that you've got that vertical forearm going down. That's the other part to to the cue measuring process where you hold the cue. So yeah, the shaft stiffness is probably the most important thing of the points I've raised in this video, because they do vary and it can affect the way you play and it can affect the way you feel the shots, and it does make a difference, because over time, the more you play the game, the more you'll develop a preference to which kind of stiffness the shaft needs to be. Okay, thank you for watching this video again. I hope that this was a little bit more information that I missed out in the last video, because like I said, I'm not an expert and I was inevitably going to miss something out, and it was pointed out to me, and it was quite right to mention it, because I had forgotten about it and it is important. So I'm just glad that I've been given this opportunity to share it with you, because I hope that when you find the cue that you're looking for, you have much more enjoyment with it, and knowing what these other extra bits are with regards to looking for cues, I hope that this information has been good enough to help you when you're looking for a cue, because once you've found a cue, there shouldn't really be any reason to go and get another one or feel that you're unhappy with it. Just buy the cue, and if you're happy with it initially, then there shouldn't be any reason to go out and buy another one unless you really want to. Because like I said before, I've owned this cue for a couple of years now, and I'm quite happy with it. I've got no intention to changing it, and provided there's always a good tip on the end of the cue, then it's always going to perform for me. So thank you for watching the video again. I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you again. See you next time. Bye.